trials on the program. Okay, so let's kick off with our first presentation. We're going to hear from the team on the On-Farm Experimentation project. This is one of the first projects in the CRC. It's one of our largest multi-organisational projects. It's based in Western Australia and is led by Professor Mark Gibberd and Dr. Julia Easton of Curtin University. And Julia will be presenting. The project exists to develop a structured and statistically rigorous methodology to engage grain growers in business analytics using their own yield data. The on-farm experimentation process will generate value through better decision-making based on the results of experiments which growers themselves undertake at full scale, looking at the factors that they themselves consider important. The outcomes of the process will enable growers to benefit from larger scale analysis aggregated amongst trusted partners, and the underlying goal is to increase the adoption of digital technologies in the grains industry, Australia's largest agribusiness sector, but currently supporting still relatively low adoption rates amongst growers. So it's a pleasure to welcome you, Julia, and over to you. You are on mute, Julia.
That's definitely $1 in the jar. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about our project, the On-Farm Experimentation, developing robust analysis for paddock scale experiments. I'm the group leader of the Curtin for Agribusiness Profitability Group initiative in the Centre for Crop and Disease Management. Just going to shift this over here. This project wouldn't be possible without this is the first project developed as part of the WA node for Food Agility CRC, and it wouldn't be possible without the co-investment from Food Agility, Curtin University and the state government through JITSI and Geographically and NGIS Australia, as well as the Science and Agribusiness Connect program, particularly the Premier. Oh, what's happened?
Oh, we can't see a full screen of your shared screen.
Yes, something weird's going on. Oh, this is the great thing about going first. Is that better? Okay, now I can't see it. Excellent. Okay, through the Science and Agribusiness Connect, which is a royalties for regions initiative through the Premier's Agriculture and Food Fellowship for the Premier's Fellow and the Premier's Early to Mid-Career Fellow in Ag and Food. So why do we do on-farm experiments? Grain growers are always experimenting through trials. Their trials on their farms lead to utility and trust in the results because they access their own data and experience. They use their own equipment on their own farm and at paddock scale. There's a high utility of the results which make it much more meaningful for them. And they spend an estimated 2 weeks per year on these trials, which for WA equates to about 110 work years per annum. But even though these experiments are set up, measurement at the end never happens. Effectiveness is often measured by eye, by standing on the edge and comparing this bit to that bit, or looking at images, for example, your NDVI or your yield monitoring data. And spatial variability often confounds these effects, making it difficult to interpret the results. So Mick would really like to be able to analyse the results from the trials he does on his farm and use this information to make decisions across the farm enterprise. And there's industry-wide benefit from on-farm trials. There's a huge number of small plot trials that are run in WA and across the country, and these are about maximising treatment effects and interactions, minimising spatial and environmental variation and variability. They're often initiated by external parties. They're expensive and they use specialised equipment. The data's usually normally distributed, and the results are often difficult to translate to paddock scale. But as a result, they're really suited to ANOVA as an analytical approach to understand these treatment effects. But when we shift to paddock scale strip trials, these are driven by farmer questions that are quite simple and less complicated than the small plot trials. They use farm equipment, they're cost effective, and that the results have more utility for the growers as they're more relevant. They encompass the spatial and environmental variability and soil types across the paddock. and their high spatial variability can often impact how crop yields respond to treatments. ANOVA is not appropriate for these analytical approaches for these paddock scale trials, and they're often analysed, often not analysed as the existing methods before this project were not suitable. So we set about shifting the on-farm experimentation of trials from experience to experiment, because without a robust trial design and analysis process, grain growers are learning and making management decisions based on experience rather than experiment. This is the kind of data that farmers would be dealing with. So on the left, we've got the paddock and we've got strips running from west to east down the paddock, and each of these different colours represent a different fertiliser treatment. And this is the results that you might see from this. This is the yield results, and you can see there's a real spatial response here that's probably soil type driven. So how do farmers interpret this result? We've embraced optimising a co-design approach. This has been absolutely critical in the design and development of this project. We've worked really closely with the growers and their agronomists in a trusted dialogue with the researchers, and this has been critical to our success. This process involves spending lots of time at the beginning of the project, engaging growers and trying to understand what they're trying to trial, helping them design and plan the experiment that will actually answer those questions, collecting all the data throughout the season. So we've got multiple touch points throughout the year to keep in contact with them, and then discussing the results with the grower and the consultants, and then reviewing and repeating. And we've had really great engagement with the WA farmers. This one's through WantFur and this group's through CSPP. So what have we learned from just that co-innovation and co-design model? Data sharing agreements are really important, particularly for defining the value propositions for all of the parties involved. We've learned about data handling and cleansing and how gnarly harvested data can be. Trial design is absolutely critical. It needs to be simple, systematic and replicated. And without getting the trial design right from the very beginning, you can't always draw the best answers from the results. We've also done a lot of work with data visualization using the Shiny app in R. And this is about visualizing data at paddock scale, visualizing it in terms of gross margin and return on investment of inputs, and incorporating sliding scales around cost and grain price to get a feel for scenarios in the future. And this co-innovation has been critical, as I said. We've worked with more than 50 trials from WA grain growers across the state over the past 3 years. The project's had a really strong focus on development of the statistical approach. And this just gives us a bit of an overview of where we started. So we've engaged with growers and their advisors all the way through. We started with ANOVA, we looked at other models and ended up sticking with geographically weighted regression. We've developed a framework for spatial analysis of crop yield. Then we've spatially represented gross margin, and then looked at gross margin based on predicted yield. And then we're investigating the application of nonlinear models, and we're working with NGIS to develop a pre-commercial analytical platform to be able to do this semi-autonomously. So what is geographically weighted regression? This allows us to understand how crop responses vary in a spatial environment. It performs a local linear regression using a moving window approach, and it estimates the relationship of a dependent variable, for example, yield or NDVI, in relation to an explanatory variable, for example, the rate of nitrogen applied. These results the results of these regressions can be visualized with raster maps of the intercept and the response. And the outputs are visualized as paddock scale maps of crop responses to a treatment-based trial. Response maps help us to separate whether the variation in yield is driven by the treatment or by the spatial variability. So we've adapted geographically weighted regression for on-farm experiments from other areas of science. And to do this, we've run 500 simulations looking at varying spatially varying minimum yield, spatially varying responses to fertiliser, rates of fertiliser, randomized complete block design strip trials using 2 reps, using a strip width of 3 meters and varying bandwidths. And Fiona Evans is the driver behind this, and she has posted these R packages on GitHub. There's a link at the bottom, and we've also published this in Agronomy. So the rest of the trials, the presentation is going to be dedicated to talking through our case study farm, which we call B3. This is an 86 hectare paddock, and it's had the crop rotations of barley, wheat and wheat in the 18, 19 and 20 seasons. This is in a low rainfall zone with a medium 10-year in-season rainfall of 266 millimetres of rainfall. And the treatments that we've looked at are different rates of phosphorus, which has either been delivered as AgFlow or double phos at 0, 30, 60 and 100 kilograms per hectare, and that with or without urea at 20 kilos or 100 kilos per hectare. And the reason we wanted to use this as the example, because it really demonstrates the research ontogeny. And each year has been a new horizon of research. The first year we used industry standard practice, which is ANOVA. The second year we've developed 2 horizons of research around the GWR analysis, but also around the spatial representation of gross margin. And the third year we've reached the GWR Horizon 3, including the spatial representation of gross margin and gross margins based on predicted yield. And critical to the results of all of this is understanding the risk and return on investment. And we've been working with CSBP to help understand that. So the real question our farmer wanted to know is phosphorus fertiliser needed on all 4 soil types? So this map here shows the paddock that's been divided into 4 different zones, which are really driven by soil type. There's an 80, a 60, 45A and 45B. And this is the layout of the treatments for the double phos. And this is the kind of results we get as the raw wheat yield. And as you can see, when we do an ANOVA, this is the representation of the yield. Across here is the rate of phosphorus in terms of kilograms per hectare. And the key take-home message here is that the means and the medians are very, very similar, and there's very little standard deviation. And this tells us that it's likely that the spatial analysis is confounding the effect of the treatment. And this plot's just showing the density of the data across each of the different wheat yields from 1 tonne per hectare to 5 tonnes per hectare. So we reanalyzed the data from 2018 with the very first layer of the geographically weighted regression, and we produced these kinds of maps. So A is the wheat yield map for barley for the 2018 season, which is in tonnes per hectare. And you can see there's a sliding scale from 0 to 1 tonnes all the way through to 5 to 6 in the dark green. The intercept map is an estimate of the barley yield across the paddock, assuming no fertiliser was applied. And this is giving you an indication of the spatial variability across the paddock. The response map here gives you the estimated barley yield response in terms of kilograms of yield to kilograms of phosphorus applied. And again, there's no response in the yellow, 0 to 6 in orange, 6 to 18 in the dark orange, and 18 plus in the red. And then we also plotted the gross margin across the paddock. So you can see in these orange areas is where he's making a loss. Light green is $0 to $500 per hectare. The mid green is $500 to $1,000, and these little pockets of dark green are $1,000 to $1,500 per hectare. And this is for just for the return on barley and phosphorus. So moving into the second year, we got some feedback on how the data was presented, and we've also increased the sophistication in the mapping and in the analysis of the GWR. So this is a very similar trial layout, but this is the 2019 season with interpolated wheat yield in tonnes per hectare, where red is 0.5 tonnes all the way up to the dark green, which is 2.5 tonnes. And when we look at the intercept map, which is the estimated wheat yield, assuming no fertiliser application, you can see this really strong spatially driven response, which lines up with the soil maps that I showed at the beginning. But we're also seeing a really nice response map in that we've got down the bottom here in terms of wheat yield responding to fertiliser. We've got a negative response in this bottom pocket down here, and then we've got some really nice strong responses in these soil types here. And then when you look at the urea, there's limited response in this strip, but you can see the spatially driven responses with low response at either end and this nice response in the middle. We also looked at the gross margin in terms of return on investment for the inputs for 2019. And on the left, you can see this is the yield, and on the right, you can see gross margin. So in this year, these maps are really similar. And so the end of the season was really hard. So the gross margin was really driven a lot by the yield rather than by the treatment in this particular example. And when we shifted into the third year of analysis, this shows wheat yield in 2020 in terms of kilograms per hectare here. This is the interpolated yield. B is the intercept map showing the spatial variability. So in the last season where we were having a negative response down in this bottom corner, we're getting a positive response, and that was really driven by season. And then we've got these areas of low yield. So the spatial variability is driving some of the yield responses, but we are also seeing in this response map to phosphorus here that certain areas are quite responsive to phosphorus and some of them are not, where it's red. And then we're also seeing a bit more of a response to the nitrogen in this map here, where down the bottom there's no point in putting any nitrogen on this part of the paddock because the response is so negative. And finally, to be able to represent gross margin and incorporate the spatial variability was really important. So there's lots of information on this slide, but the take-home message is in this map we can demonstrate gross margin by treatment strip. It's a little bit hard to see in here, but it's all lined up. And across the top line, this is the B to E is 0, 30, 60 and 100 kilograms of phosphorus with no nitrogen, and along the bottom is 0, 30, 60 and 100 kilograms of phosphorus with 20 kilos of nitrogen. So we can predict if we were to apply any of these treatments across the paddock, these are the likely gross margin returns that the farmer would expect to see. And this sort of information can be used to make decisions on this paddock, but also to interpolate that across other paddocks in the farm. And there's a lot of data on this slide as well. We've done an analysis of the yield and the return on investment in terms of gross margin for each of the zones, so the soil types across the top here, and each of the treatment combinations. This was done by Luke Dawson, who's the senior agronomist at CSBP. And the key take-home messages here are that there's options. So in this bottom left-hand corner, there's a low-risk option, or there's a high risk option depending on the season. But Mick, whose trial this was, tends to go for the lower risk option because the likelihood of having a good finish at the end of the season is a lot lower because it's a low rainfall zone. So it's really interesting to see his decision-making process around how will he treat each of these soil types based on the results that we've been able to give. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is if if he had continued with his strategy from 2018 without making any changes based on the trial, he would have made $657.59 per hectare. Taking this middle risk approach, he's made $909.70, which is a more than 50% increase. And there's the potential, if you wanted to take the high risk strategy, of going to $1,559.93. So those are the kinds of decisions that we're helping farmers to make through this trial work. The other thing I wanted to highlight is we've been working with NGIS, who are a national GIS company. They are taking the research outputs that we've developed and creating an online platform for farmers to be able to analyse their own trials in a semi-autonomous way. This is hot off the press. It only came in last night. We're rapidly racing to finish the project off and to finish off this part of the build. But it's got components around being able to look at different farms or different trials across your paddock and using the Google Maps approach to be able to visualize it in the paddock scale, being able to visualize different trial and treatments, but also different soil types across the paddock. And then there's a report generating function that will create the analysis and export the details into a PowerPoint slide. So it's really exciting to see that coming together, particularly given the amount of work that we've put in to get it to this point. So in closing, what have we learnt? We've learnt that farmers have done experiments before, but results are not measured, and trials are analysed by eye or through images, yield monitoring and observation. The OFE processes help to measure and better understand the results of an experiment. The speed of interpretation and delivery of results is increased by early, before trial implementation, discussions about trial design with the farmers and the agronomists. We've also collected paddock history before analysing current yield data. This is critical for interpretation of the results. There's huge benefits in the frequent communication and discussions between farmers, agronomists and researchers. And finally, the feedback from the farmers on gross margin and yield predictions, interactive maps using Shiny were highly valued, and when combined with future predictions of responses and gross margins, supports management practice change. And I'd like to acknowledge there's a very long list of people that have been involved in the project, and we've been lucky to work with a number of grower groups across the state. And thank you all for listening to my presentation. Dave, I hope you're there.
Totally. Thank you, Julia. And that last slide is a great one to end on because it just shows you the richness of that project and the engagement. So thank you for the whole team. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask you first and put everyone on notice that I will be asking you first. Pick a eureka moment and tell us about it.
I think when we sat with Mick the first time, he's a very innovative farmer, and he's really open to learning, and showing him the data and watching the penny drop around the kilograms per kilogram in the fertiliser results. And then he started asking questions like, oh, what about if the price was this? Or what about if the fertiliser cost was this? And that's how we incorporated these sliding scales into the Shiny app. And so that helps with the scenario planning. So if you can predict the yield for any of the treatments, and then you can adjust what the fertiliser price and the grain price may be, then that can give you a much more accurate way of going about it. And I think because on that trip we went with the research agronomists from CSBP to a number of farmers, and really having them see it in practice and hearing it in a different way really hit the nail on the head, I think.
Awesome. So, so a couple of questions. So, first of all, to what degree is the output of those estimations controlled by the accurate calibration of the yield monitor? How sensitive?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I'm going to say that's a really good question. And just say, we have to take the data that we receive as is. So, but it's a really good point. If they're not being calibrated, then that's going to be a problem.
Okay, so
it's a good question.
Thank you, Emma. I should have known that was Emma. I'll de-identify the last name, Emma. Well done.
I'm sure I can guess.
Okay, so a question from Alistair. With response maps, are the growers able to see the estimate of response at a commercial P rate, for example, 50 kilograms per hectare of P?
Yeah, and so having the sliding scale in the Shiny app also means that we can adjust for those sorts of things. Yeah, and the treatments, we really were trying to push the envelope with the P responses in particular on Mick's farm, and he didn't think he needed to put any P on this particular site at all, and he's changed his practice, and so there's parts of the paddock that he doesn't put any nitrogen on, which is driven by that bottom end of the bottom corner, but he is now putting phosphorus out a lot more than he was, and the returns that he's getting are absolutely what's driving that adoption.
Cool. Have you had any opportunity to measure any practice change that's emanating from the engagement process? That's from Chris.
Yeah, good question, Chris. Thank you. I'd love to do that. We haven't done it formally. We've done it anecdotally. But yeah, that might be a nice student project or something to follow up with. We did, at the beginning of the project, we had a social scientist working on the team, and she did some work interviewing farmers about how they do their trials. But yeah, you're right, we haven't done that part.
Any plans or activities where producers are interested in ingesting those variable maps or variability maps into some form of interactive mapping or variable rate application of inputs? Yeah, and it depends a lot on the farmer. So Mick's probably one of those people that really, it's not widely adopted in WA, but there are some people that do it, and Mick is a really good example of how you can do that well. And he maps all of his paddocks, and so he can take the results from this paddock across to other paddocks in the farm. Is that all of the question? I'm not sure I've answered it. Sorry, Dave. No, I guess it was really a case of with the variability outputs, could that be, for example, yeah, absolutely. Sorry. And that's certainly where we'd like to take this kind of work next. So, Mick's farm is a really good example. And I also wanted to say, we've done lots of different types of trials, but the nitrogen and fertilizer trials have been the most helpful in developing the method because it's really easy to see the treatment effects. There's some really gnarly problems around soil amelioration that are happening in WA. So looking at deep ripping and moldboard ploughing, and then, really serious changing of the whole structure of the soil type. And so we've done some work in developing the GWR for those types of treatments, but it's more complex and it's a little bit more tricky to communicate. But the nitrogen approach has been really good. Okay, but thanks for enjoying this ongoing question. There's a couple I'm in the hot seat. 4 minutes, so everyone be on notice. Everyone's really. I should have talked for longer. No, I started you early, so I offered you time without telling. So here we go. 2 questions. One is the geographically weighted regression. So Precision Ag's got a bit of a heritage around krigging. It was kicked off through the Vespa tool out of U Sydney, and I guess people are born and bred around certain approaches because they're not statisticians. And this is a big nod to Fiona and the team who've done a lot of heavy lifting in the project. Can you tell us a little bit about the selection of that GWR approach? I knew I was going to get a question like this, and I really, this is where I need Fiona sitting next to me to answer the question. Look, we did try a number of different approaches, and I think if you look into the
into the paper, there's a bit more detail about why we've selected this one. It really seems to be the most appropriate for what we're doing. One of the only limitations that we are having at this point is it works really nicely when you're doing fertiliser when your response is on a linear curve. But once you start to hit the peak of that and flatten out, then you're looking at more of a quadratic response. And so we're investigating options around that. But yeah, I'm trying to avoid answering that question because I don't know the answer.
Well, you do, and thank you. And everyone to know, so Fiona Evans and the Murdoch team are doing some heavy lifting in that. So we're very happy if you're interested to explore that more, we can put you in touch with Fiona.
For sure.
So the other question, which you can infer from the title of the seminar program, is the gnarly. What do you consider was the lowest point of the project, the most challenging piece?
I think if anyone has ever done work with grain farmers, the hardest bit is getting the data off the bloody harvester. And, you know, it seems like a really simple thing. And I mean, I was involved in in a number of projects in GRDC where we had exactly the same problem. If only we had the data, then we could just get on and get it done. And this is why maintaining those touch points all the way throughout the year. So you've got that relationship, but the agronomists are responsible for going out there and actually getting it off there before they go on holidays so that we can analyse it really quickly. And it was great this year. In the last season, we managed to get simple analyses done before the end of the year, which is amazing because normally they kind of come in February and then we're doing it March and April. But because we lined all the ducks up, that helps. So yeah, absolutely getting the yield data off the yield monitor. My John Deere is fabulous because we can log in if we have access and download the data and away we go. And it's a secure transfer of data, but ultimately it's a lot of picking up thumb drives and making sure that we've got all the stuff that we need.
Awesome, thank you. And no people, animals, or coloured machines were harmed in the conducting experimentation.
Not by me.
Looking beyond your project, and this one's from Anonymous, so I don't know who to thank, but you mentioned the project's nearing endpoint. What's next for this particular project? The growers going to actively use your research outputs, or what's your...
Yeah, so the idea is we're developing, so NGIS are developing this web portal to be able to semi-autonomously do the analysis of the trials, and also it's incorporating NDVI and other things. And we want the analytics component to be black box so that as we improve that capability, and we're working with the Statistics for the Australian Grains Industry Group, who are also progressing in this space, to be able to incorporate any updates to the analytics through that process. So it's not just, you know, it's updatable as the research technology improves.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. Look, on behalf of everyone, thank you and your extensive team of partners and co-workers on the project. Thanks for being our guinea pig. So everyone, you've got the recipe for the next 2 days. So great presentation, Julia. And everyone, you know where to find Julia and her team if you need them. Thanks, Julia.